A major point of interest that arises at this point is that although all confessions involve an admission of guilt, there are different types of false confession, and they have been classified in various ways by different researchers, but here we will refer to the definitions used by Cassin in 2008. The first type of false confession to consider here is the voluntary false confession. In this type of false confession, the confession is freely given by an individual to the police in the absence of any kind of pressure to confess. High-profile examples include the case of the kidnap of aviator Charles Lindbergh's son, to which over 200 people confessed. More recently, there was the case of the hoax Yorkshire Ripper tapes, when tape-recorded confessions were sent to the police team investigating the crimes, which goaded the police on their failure to solve the case. Cassin and Keikel in 1996 note that there are various reasons as to why a confession of this type might be made, including a chance to gain notoriety, to receive punishment for some other event about which the individual feels guilt, the inability to distinguish reality from fiction, or the desire to end further questioning in order to avoid probing about a more serious crime. Cassin goes on to note that other false confessions are coerced in some way or are the result of some external pressure being applied to the accused. However, he further divides this category into two types of false confession. The coerced compliant false confession is the first example, and here the accused confesses to the crime in order to escape from a stressful questioning situation. Remember that the questioning may have gone on for a significant amount of time, and suspects may have been isolated for long periods of time as well. In 2004, Drizin and Leo examined a number of false confessions and found that 34% of them came from interrogations that had lasted between 6 and 12 hours, while 39% came from interrogations that lasted between 12 and 24 hours, and that the mean length of interrogations that resulted in false confessions was in excess of 16 hours. Alternatively, it may be the case that the suspect has been promised some form of potential advantage if they confess, such as a potentially lenient sentence, or to be removed from a harmful situation, whether that harm is real or indeed imagined by the suspect. However, in some ways, the most interesting of all the false confessions from a psychological point of view is that of the final type we will consider here, the coerced, internalized false confession. In this case, not only does the individual confess to a crime that they did not commit, but they also come to believe that they did actually commit the crime of which they have been accused. There are two possible explanations here. Participants may actually develop a memory of committing the crime, perhaps as a result of repeatedly hearing the police version of events over time. Alternatively, they admit to committing the crime, but they simply cannot remember having done so. Either because they believe that they have blocked out the event, as in the case of Michael Crow reported by Drizin and Colgin in 2004. 14-year-old Michael had been accused of stabbing his sister to death, but could not recall the event at all. However, he was led to believe by the police that there was a substantial amount of evidence against him, and he came to believe that he must have committed the crime and be suffering from some form of split personality disorder, where the bad Michael had killed his sister and the good Michael was blocking out the memory of having done so. Fortunately, the true perpetrator of this crime was later apprehended by the police and all charges against Michael were dropped. An alternative explanation, in some cases, may be that the accused individuals had been under the influence of alcohol or drugs at the time that the crime was committed, and therefore this may explain to them their inability to recall any details of the crime, with Finney 2003 noting that statistics suggest that alcohol may be involved in as many as 70% of all crimes committed. You may now be asking yourself why anyone would confess to a crime that they had not committed, and you may also be thinking that there is no way that you would ever find yourself confessing to something that you know you did not do. However, there are a number of factors that come together to lead to the phenomenon of false confession, and Gudjonsson in 1987 has referred to this process as interrogative suggestibility. That is, the increased suggestibility, willingness to accept someone else's version of events, that results from the process of interrogation. The combination of factors such as repeated questioning over an extensive period of time, coupled with internal factors such as memory ability, intelligence, age, and experience of police questioning, all combine to result in increased interrogative suggestibility. It has been found that those who are lower in intelligence, younger in age, and who have less experience of police questioning are all more likely to give false confessions. It was reported by Sigurdsson and Gudjonsson in 1997. It can be hard for us to imagine why it might be the case that anyone would confess to a crime that they had not committed. And yet, we have already seen numerous examples from the real world where this has happened. But there have also been attempts by psychologists to recreate these events in the laboratory by making participants believe that they have committed a crime when in actual fact they know that this was not the case. I want to turn attention now to some of these studies and to think about what they tell us about the nature of false confessions. One of the classic studies that has looked at false confession and how they can be reproduced in the laboratory is that of Kassin and Kiekel in 1996. As part of this study, participants were asked to enter data into a computer, but they were warned that at no time should they press the Alt key, as this would crash the computer and result in problems. During the task, they were required to work alongside a confederate of the experimenter, although to the true participant, the confederate appeared to be another participant also. However, unknown to the true participants was the fact that the computer had actually been programmed to crash partway through the process of data entry. Once this had happened, the experimenter accused the participant of having pressed the Alt key and crashing the program. But all the participants were innocent, and all of them denied the accusation. Half of the participants were later presented with the confederate of the experimenter, who appeared as another participant as far as they were concerned, and claimed that they had seen the true participant press the Alt key. When this happened, then 65% of the participants confessed to the crime of pressing the forbidden key. The other half of the participants had a witness who said that they had not seen what had happened. In this case, only 12% of the participants confessed. This shows us that it is possible to experimentally recreate false confessions and get people to confess to events that they know they did not do. It also shows us that the presence of a witness who supports the accusation also leads to a large increase in the proportion of people willing to confess. This has implications for the interview process in those territories where the police are able to employ such fabricated evidence as part of interviewing suspects. However, although this is an interesting and undoubtedly important study, it is not without faults. For example, there are no consequences to the admission of guilt, unlike in a real police interview situation. And there is the possibility that some of the participants may have been unsure as to whether they had pressed the button or not. They may have done so by mistake or without awareness in their desire to complete the data entry task as quickly as possible. Later studies have looked at false confessions in situations that attempt to address these limitations. For example, in Horslenberg et al.'s 2003 study, they addressed the issue of consequences by replicating the Kassin and Kiekel study, but adding the element that a false confession would result in the loss of some of the participation fee. Despite the introduction of these consequences for false confessions, the results of the original study by Kassin and Kiekel were largely replicated. In a later study by Horslenberg et al. In 2006, they removed the element of ambiguity from the study by using a design in which there was no doubt as to whether participants were guilty or not. In this later study, participants had the opportunity to cheat by looking at an examination paper for an upcoming exam when the experimenter had left the room. All participants were later accused of cheating. In this study, where there is no ambiguity about whether the crime was committed or not, it was still possible to elicit some false confessing, albeit at a relatively low level, with only 1 out of 12 participants confessing falsely. A more recent study has taken this idea even further, investigating the idea of the internalized false confession through the use of manipulated video evidence. It is important to note here that in the US it's acceptable for the police to suggest that incriminating evidence exists, whether it does or not, as this is believed to encourage suspects to confess. And we have seen that the use of witnesses to corroborate accusations has a dramatic effect on the percentage of false confessions. In Nash and Wade's study of 2009, participants had to complete a computerized gambling task, and they were later accused of having cheated on the task, which none of them had. Participants were also told that there was footage of them cheating on the task. Half of the participants were only told about the video evidence, whereas the other half actually saw the manipulated footage. Nash and Wade reported that those participants who actually saw the video evidence were more likely to confess to the crime and to internalize this confession, to actually believe that they had cheated, compared to participants who were only told about the incriminating footage. Among those participants who saw the manipulated footage, there was a mean compliance rate of over 95% and a mean of 70% full internalization rate across their 2 experiments. This study clearly shows us that it's possible to induce internalized false confessions even in the relatively innocuous setting of the psychology laboratory, never mind about the stressful situation of undergoing a police interrogation. In summary then, we have seen that although confessions are frequently accepted by juries as compelling evidence of guilt, there may be a number of occasions and reasons as to why such confessions might be questionable. These reasons may be due to personal factors such as age and intelligence, or to tactics used by the police during interrogations, or a combination of the two, as we've seen. There are different types of false confession. These may be voluntary, coerced, and internalized or compliant. Finally, we have seen that it's possible to recreate these false confessions in a laboratory setting. Given the important implications that can result from a false confession and the fact that they can be relatively easily elicited in the psychology laboratory, it is important that psychologists continue to increase their understanding of the processes underlying false confessions, and also that they use this research to inform the criminal justice system.